Good evening, and since you are in India, namaskar, which means I salute the divinity in you. I welcome you all to the 6th Asian KLEMS conference. Welcome you to India and to the Reserve Bank of India, henceforth RBI. We are honored to host this conference in a physical mode after the arduous isolation imposed by the pandemic. The hill town of Lonavala, which is actually an ancient resting place for travelers and traders, is nestled in India's soon-to-be drenched by the monsoon among what are called the Western Ghats, which is a chain of mountains running 30 to 50 kilometers inland and parallel to India's Western Ghats. These mountains are untouched by human hands, and therefore they have flora and foliage and animals which are probably not found elsewhere in the world. We hope that its verdant ambience will dispel all pandemic blues and provide a salubrious backdrop for this conference, which has productivity, growth, and resilience in the Asian economies as its theme. The conference itself is a tribute to the fortitude and perseverance displayed by Asian economies through the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Before I turn to the subject of my address today, I thought a journey down memory lane might perhaps be appropriate for this occasion. The Asia KLEMS has a very short but eventful history, replete with promoting the building of databases and conducting international productivity comparisons among Asian economies. The first Asia KLEMS conference was held in Tokyo, as Shirupa mentioned, in 2011. The abiding interest in that conference was in productivity growth, going by the papers presented there, a theme to which we return today. The next 4 conferences were held in Seoul, Taipei, Tokyo, and Beijing, in which attention diversified to setting up the KLEMS database and accounting framework, structural changes and sources of productivity growth, methodological issues and productivity gaps, growth and productivity, and the role of factors such as information and communication technology, or ICT, intangibles, trade, and labor markets. At the time of the 5th Asia KLEMS meeting in 2019, India was selected as the venue of the next conference. Unfortunately, COVID-related restrictions on international travel prevented the conference from being convened in 2021, but finally, the 6th Asia KLEMS conference is being held today. India KLEMS, which is a part of Asia KLEMS and of the larger World KLEMS initiative, aims to measure and analyze productivity growth in India by using the KLEMS framework. It started in 2009 with financial support from the RBI. From 2015, the India KLEMS project was nurtured at the Center for Development Economics, or CDE, the Delhi School of Economics, by Professor K.L. Krishna and his team, who have made remarkable and valuable contributions to the greater KLEMS initiative right from its inception. From 2022, the RBI is the home of India KLEMS and its database, which consists of inputs, which is KLEMS, output, which is gross value added, gross value of output, and total factor productivity, or TFP. And these estimates are available from 1980 to 2019-20. I measure these years on a financial year basis, which is from April to March. The next update of the database, with the incorporation of data for 2021, is scheduled for August 2023. Talking KLEMS to hardcore KLEMS practitioners is a formidable challenge, and I shall not venture where angels fear to tread. In the rest of my address, therefore, I will try to provide a user's perspective on how we read KLEMS data for policy purposes. So let me use KLEMS data to tease out some stylized trends. It is widely believed that a structural slowdown has been spreading across the global economy after growth peaked in 2010. About half of this slowdown can be attributed to demographic factors, such as aging population, slowing working age cohort increases, and declining labor force participation. Alongside, growth rates of investment and total factor productivity are declining. The engine of trade, which powered the global economy in the 80s and the 90s, has also weakened considerably. Gains from better education and health have been diminishing as improvements in education and health go a-begging for lack of investments worldwide. More recently, powerful forces have accentuated the global slowdown. They are the financial crises that have been recurring with disturbing intensity, the once-in-a-century pandemic, and the war in Ukraine, all of which have left lasting scars. Accordingly, the 2020s, which is 2022 to 30, may turn out to be another lost decade, preceded by the 10 lost years from 2010. It has been argued that the global potential growth rate, that is, the maximum growth rate that an economy can sustain at full employment and full capacity without igniting inflation, the speed limit of the economy, if you will. And this has fallen close to a full percentage points in 2011 to 21 relative to 2000 to 2010. These are the World Bank's estimates based on KLEMS data. The global slowdown has pulled down advanced economies and emerging and developing economies alike, but it has imposed a major setback on the latter, that is the EMDEs, pushing back their chances of catch-up or convergence. Consequently, the capacity to lift their populations out of poverty, to reduce inequality, and to achieve the aspirational goals of development is endangered, as well as their ability to harness the benefits of newer technologies stemming from green transition and the digital revolution. What is worrisome is that for EMDEs, all the drivers of growth, which are factor reallocations, human capital formation, the share of working age population, and investment growth, are all losing strength at the same time. This could stall the process of development which has been underway since the middle of the preceding century. Meanwhile, policy uncertainty at the global level has surged, and forces of deglobalization and trade and finance disintegration have gained ground, vitiating the environment in which EMDs sought to harness developmental opportunities and to manage their challenges. The World Bank estimates that for EMDEs, potential growth as defined earlier fell to 5% a year during 2011 to 21, from 6% a year during 2000 to 2010, and it will slow further to an average of 4% during 2022 to 30. In particular, investment growth is likely to be insufficient to reach pre-pandemic trends. In the view of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, greed for foreign direct investment in industry remains fragile, especially in developing countries. There is significant risk that the momentum of recovery in international investment will stall prematurely, hampering efforts to boost finance for sustainable development. Let me turn to Asia. The real GDP growth surge in East Asia, which includes the Pacific region, following the 1997-98 Asian financial crisis, lost steam during the period 2011 to 21 in a largely cyclical downturn. With the onset of the pandemic, there was a sharp fall in fixed capital investment and labor supply, both of which still remain below pre-pandemic levels. The weakening of human and physical capital will likely weigh on medium to long-term growth prospects of the region in an environment of reconfiguration of supply chains, elevated debt levels, tighter financing conditions, and uncertainty relating to trade and technology transfer. Over the period 2022 to 30, the region's potential output growth is projected by the World Bank to slow to 4.6% a year from 6.2% a year in 2011 to 21. Falling TFP growth is estimated to account for about 3/5 of this slowdown, with the remaining 2/5 attributable equally to slowing labor supply growth and capital accumulation. Economic activity in South Asia rebounded strongly from the recession caused by the pandemic, when its large informal sector was hit hard by job and income losses. Output in the region is on track to grow by about 6% a year between 2022 and 2030, faster than the 2010s annual average of 5.5% and only moderately slower than growth in the 2000s. This will make it the fastest growing EMD region in the remainder of this decade, as demographic trends expand the working age population, the investment rate remains elevated, and productivity growth continues to benefit from the shift of resources away from agriculture and informal activity. Although population growth is expected to moderate, labor force growth will be supported by stabilization of the participation rate after 2 decades of decline. South Asia's potential growth is projected to slow only marginally to 6.1% a year on average in the 2020s, from 6.2% a year in the 2010s. The forecast of potential output growth through 2030 is underpinned mainly by a projected recovery in TFP growth. In Central Asia, which overlaps with emerging Europe in the World Bank's analysis, the pandemic and the war in Ukraine have taken a grievous toll, reversing recent progress in raising living standards and leaving deep economic wounds among vulnerable populations. The region's output is estimated to have shrunk by 0.3% in 2022 and is expected to flatten in 2030, weakened by erosion of labor productivity, muted investment, and scarred human capital. Potential output growth is projected to slow from an annual average of 3.6% per year over 2011 to 21 to 3% per year over 2022 to 30. In West Asia, which overlaps with North Africa in the World Bank's database, GDP growth has been uneven over the past 2 decades, slowing in the 2010s under the effect of political turmoil and military conflict. The World Bank estimates that potential growth halved between 2000s and 2010s, with the slowdown driven by broad-based deceleration in capital stock, in total factor productivity, and in working age populations. The pandemic has further damaged these drivers, with output contracting by 3.6% in 2020. A rebound in 2021 was insufficient to reverse the decline in output. Potential output growth is projected to remain lackluster, growing by about 2.5% a year during 2022 to 30. A reduction in the contribution of labor to potential growth is expected to be partly offset by an anemic improvement in TFP growth and stronger investment. Human capital accumulation is projected to slow owing to weaker growth in the working age population. So let me sum up these trends. Global growth was slowing even ahead of the pandemic relative to its performance up to the global financial crisis. This loss of speed was led by advanced economies, but emerging and developing market economies were pulled in by 2010-2011. Only East and South Asia proved resilient and maintained historical growth trends. Even in these regions, the share of labor in output and its contribution by way of quality has fallen while capital accumulation has moderated. It is said that East and South Asia will become the world's center of gravity, and capital accumulation will continue to contribute more than half of GDP growth. The rest will have to come from productivity, and this is the subject to which I will turn shortly. So potential growth is weakening broadly across Asia, with all drivers slackening. East Asia is expected to be the EMD region with the sharpest decline in both aggregate and per capita potential growth during 2022 to 30, mainly reflecting slower capital accumulation and TFP growth. The second largest decline in potential growth is projected for Central Asia from the continued weakness in labor force growth. Potential growth is projected to rise in West Asia in 2022 to 30 as strengthening TFP growth offsets demographic headwinds to potential growth. This secular slowdown over the last decade and expectations of another slow decade ahead warrants a renewed exploration of the linkages between physical capital investment, improvements in human capital, and exploitation of technological advancements. In an environment in which populations across the world are either aging or declining, and investment rates are trapped in a long-term deceleration, including foreign direct investment, it is perhaps an opportune moment to focus on productivity growth as the means of arresting the downturn and charting a new trajectory of pushing outwards the growth possibility frontier. It has been observed that productivity is not everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything, and this is attributed to Paul Krugman. So this is the theme of my address today. Let me turn to what I have termed as the paradox of productivity. Globally, productivity growth has undergone a prolonged slowdown since 2010, after a brief recovery in the years immediately following the global financial crisis. This deceleration in TFP is more pronounced in EMDs than in their AE peers. India has also suffered a decline in TFP growth, although moderate relative to the global experience. The average TFP growth rate in India slowed from 1.3% during the period 2000 to 2007 to 1.2% during 2011 to 2019, as against the EMDE average of 0.2% and the global average of 0.1%. TFP growth accounted for about 20% of India's aggregate GDP growth during this period, coinciding with the contribution of both capital and labor declining. GDP growth in India has remained relatively resilient, averaging close to 7% during 2000 to 2022, with some ebbing of capital formation and employment growth in sync with the deceleration in TFP growth. For the period 2022 to 2030, the World Bank projects India's potential growth to reflect the outlook for South Asia. Underlying the general productivity slowdown are several confounding puzzles, at least from the policy practitioner's point of view. I will focus on a few important ones in the interest of time. First, the slackening of productivity is synchronized across jurisdictions, apparently impervious to differentials in levels of development, inherent heterogeneity in current country characteristics, and differences in policy responses. As the economist Alistair Dipp pointed out, in a factor modeling framework, TFP growth is shown to be one of the most important correlates of common developments in GDP growth. Second, this co-movement of TFP across geographies suggests it could be driven by common factors. In this context, it has been pointed out that cyclical factors, including changing factor utilization, accounted for a third of the slowdown in productivity in the post-global financial crisis period. This suggests that fluctuations in productivity are actually demand-driven, calling into question the received wisdom on the long-run neutrality of demand with respect to productivity. It also does not fit well with the observed long-run slowdown in productivity, which suggests that structural factors may be at work, whereas cyclical drivers are more short-run and reversible by definition. Third, the fall in productivity growth is coexisting with a slew of new technological developments such as cloud computing, big data analytics, robotics, fintech, and the digital revolution, to name a few. Once again, the solo paradox of the 70s and 80s. To quote him, you can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics, seems to have come alive. Some proximate hypotheses compete for explanatory power in unraveling the productivity puzzle. First, there is the mismeasurement view, which seeks to obtain further refinements in the manner in which factor inputs and their quality are measured, so as to yield uncontaminated estimates of TFP. As Dale Jorgensen, a founding father of the KLEMS framework, used to emphasize, The lessons of decades of experience is that these parameters are highly sensitive to methods of measurement. There are also the output effects of adding newer inputs like digitalization to be considered. As the OECD has argued, digital technologies are transforming our economies and seem to offer a vast potential to enhance the productivity of firms. Second, it is argued that new technological developments are still in the installation stage, and hence they produce only localized gains in productivity. To quote a view in this context, a GPT, which is a general purpose technology, does not deliver productivity gains on arrival. Raising productivity will need a sufficiently large stock of the new capital and complementary business process changes involving human capital and organizational changes in investment decisions so that it is integrated into production in order to harness its benefits. For instance, it has been found that investments in IT yield substantial benefits, but over a gestation, which peaks after about 7 years after installation. Moreover, cutting-edge technologies remains uneven across countries and between firms. Nearly half of SMEs and about a third of large firms in emerging and developing Asia report difficulty in obtaining financing as the major impediment to technology adoption. Commensurately, aggregate R&D expenditures have slowed down in Asia and in the world at large. Other explanations of the productivity slowdown have also been offered in terms of the leapfrogging of many EMDs over the relatively productive and labor-absorbing manufacturing sector, right to the less productive services sector. Also, reasons have been attributed to trade and technology fragmentation, disruption in global value chains, and the possibility of dissipation of profits. That is, innovative firms displace lagging firms from the market, but without adding commensurately to output. Let me now conclude. Given that multiple factors could be at work, a multi-pronged approach woven into a comprehensive policy intervention is needed to reignite and sustain productivity growth. The policy response has to be powered by technological capital deepening, accompanied by long-term investment in research and development to nurture a competitive innovation ecosystem, skill development through sustained educational attainments and training, and building up the physical infrastructure. EMDs need to leverage the potential of the services sector to drive productivity growth. Investing in ICT infrastructure, securing reduction in trade costs, like those associated with shipping, logistics, and regulation, and supporting business-enabling reforms could help to engage the private sector in partnering in this endeavor. In addition, raising labor force participation rates, especially among women and older workers, could also boost productivity, but this will require investments in workability, retraining, and acquisition of new skills in step with changing technology. The OECD has cited digitalization as a key avenue for future productivity growth by harnessing the power to rapidly diffuse and replicate ideas, informational goods, and business processes at near zero marginal cost. Easing and expanding access to finance for small and medium enterprises can generate productivity bursts, especially in EMDs. Central bankers are stakeholders in this effort in view of the mandates of macroeconomic and financial stability. A deeper understanding of productivity trends is needed by them in order to judge the position of the economy on the business cycle so as to fashion appropriate policy responses that ensure sustained non-inflationary economic growth. In turn, this will promote financial market confidence and enable the overall flow of finance in the economy. Against this backdrop, the theme of this conference is indeed timely and relevant. Your deliberations today and over the next few days will surely provide deeper insights into the structural drivers of productivity and factor accumulation that create the conditions for sustainable development. New challenges, including climate change, digitalization, and the reshaping of global value chains, have to be addressed, and new opportunities have to be seized. The conference brings together the best minds, experiences, and learnings on a subject of extremely topical importance. I'm sure that your discussions will enrich our understanding of productivity and growth in Asia and lead to better policy outcomes. I thank you all for your participation and wish you success in crossing another milestone in the journey of Asia KLEMS. Thank you.